Whoa, whoa, hey Ann.
Yep.
What you're doing, it's called a mulch volcano, and it is horrible for the tree.
Okay.
We want to do the opposite of what you're doing.
This is my most prized fruit tree. I planted this peach tree a couple years ago, and as you can see, it has totally thrived. This is my apple tree that I planted on the very same day. And as you can see, it is the opposite of thrived. I'm about to expand my orchard in a huge way and plant hundreds of trees. So before I screw a whole bunch of them up, I invited my friend Daniel, who is a professional arborist who literally fixes other people's mistakes for a living, to come help us learn how to do this right the first time. Let's go plant some fruit trees together. All right, Daniel, this is a nectarine tree that I myself have propagated. So I want you to show us how to plant it.
All right, sounds good. So the biggest mistake people will make when they're planting trees is planting them too deep. So we gotta start off with the right type of hole.
So why don't you start digging the hole and I'll start prepping this stuff.
Perfect.
Oh wow, you really are going wide here.
We are going wide here. We want to create a really good environment for the roots. For a bare root tree like this, we have a hole that is about 20 inches in diameter and only 2 to 3 inches deep, and that is deepest you want to plant a bare root tree like this.
Oh, well, we can spot some problems I've done in my garden already.
And so the second biggest mistake that people will make is they'll just stick a tree in the ground without looking at the roots, and those roots will be growing in a circular kind of direction around the trunk of the tree.
Which you told us in the You're Probably Killing Your Fruit Trees Summer Pruning Edition is called girdling, correct?
Exactly, and so as the trunk grows and those roots grow, the roots, which are, pumping up the water and the nutrients, end up like choking the trunk of the tree.
Those roots need to breathe.
Exactly. There's lots of illustrations where you have a tree and the roots are a perfect reflection of the tree underground. Guess what? That isn't how it works. These roots are gonna be growing within the first probably foot, maybe even 2 or 3 inches of this compacted soil, and they're gonna spread out way wider likely than the canopy of the actual tree, probably growing towards the water source of your pond.
Great.
And so when we're setting this up, we wanna make sure again that the main tier of roots are not going to be growing in a circular direction around that tree, because again, as the roots grow wider and the trunk grows wider, that will essentially have the tree choke itself. And so that ends up killing the tree. It can take a couple years, it can take up to 30 years, but that improper planting is a huge issue in most people's yards. It's something that I have to fix a lot as an arborist.
Okay, well, we actually have a girdled tree that I planted a few years ago that we're gonna fix today. We'll look at that in a second. But because this is mostly really compacted clay soil, we're gonna put some of my incredible homemade compost in here to give this tree the best head start possible. Can you show us how you spread out the roots here?
Yeah, so we're gonna make sure the roots are spread out. This area right here, again, we want that to be pretty much at ground level. So I'm gonna add a little bit of support underneath that. And then again, we wanna make sure there are no roots growing in a circular way around the tree.
Yeah. Okay.
And so you see here, we have this root kind of growing in that direction, these roots growing in this direction. And so this is pretty good. And so now we're literally just gonna backfill. So another really big mistake people will make when they're planting is, they really want that tree to be sturdy and stable. So
so we come in and do that, right?
Wrong. So when we go in and stomp on the soil, that really compacts the soil. And trees, we know they photosynthesize with our leaves, but they also need to breathe, like literal cellular respiration like we do when we breathe in our lungs. And so these roots need oxygen. And so when we stomp on the soil, that takes out all of the air pockets that allow for oxygen exchange in those roots and causes really severe damage. So this is literally what you want. You have these roots at the surface level. You have this rich compost kind of mixed with the native soil.
Yep.
And we haven't stomped on this. Look how nice and light and fluffy this is. This is perfect. This is gonna be so much better for the tree. One of the biggest risks right now is, especially going into summer, is this can dry out.
Yep.
So we have some things to kind of help with that right now.
And of course, because we're lazy gardeners, we're not gonna be thinking about watering this dang thing all summer. So let's talk about how to mitigate the need for that. First and foremost, we're gonna put this little ring of cardboard. This is a special piece of cardboard that my bunny pooped and peed on for a few weeks, so it's really got some good nitrogen in it and other things like that. We're just gonna weight this down. And because we're trying to maximize the amount of things we're able to grow here, as well as wanting to deter pests and diseases and all that stuff, we've got a few things that my friend Billy at Permapastures Farm recommended we plant with every tree. This is garlic that I grew from seed. It's already gone through the vernalization process, so if we put this in here, it's gonna be golden. We've got some strawberries that I propagated over there that are going to kind of shade the ground around it. We also have some daffodils because for whatever reason, apparently planting bulbed flowers around your trees will help supposedly get rid of moles and voles, which we've got a lot of here, and that is a big issue of those little root munchers. And last but not least, we're gonna put a couple little blueberries that I stole from the forest around it as well. So they'll all be kind of the same height right now because this is really pathetic and small, but I am quite proud that I have been able to raise this for almost 3 years to get to this point. But there again, the time, Lordy. So what we're gonna do is just poke some spots in this here cardboard, and we'll put a couple little pieces of garlic down in there, stick those in with some compost, strawberries down in there, we'll put a couple of those guys around. The single source of the most damage of my already planted trees is actually caused by string trimmers. So when we go to mow the lawn and we come back up to this and there's grass growing up all around it, the temptation is literally to come in and mess this up with a string trimmer, which will screw with the tree for the rest of its entire life. So we want to plant some ground cover plants that won't get super high around this tree so that there isn't actually any grass that will come up around it, and therefore we don't really have to worry quite as much about string trimmer damage to the bottom of the tree. However, we are going to address that in a few minutes on a much bigger tree, because this one is kind of a small and pathetic example for a lot of this stuff right now.
Whoa, hey Ann.
Yep.
So real fast, what you're doing, it's called a mulch volcano, and it is horrible for the tree.
Okay.
We want to do the opposite of what you're doing.
The opposite, let's do it.
So when we're applying mulch, we want where the trunk meets the roots to be at ground level, and we want to keep it there. So we want this mulching to be wide and shallow, and we do not want to cover this specific area. So we almost want to create a mulch ring rather than a mulch volcano. What we've done here is the opposite of what you'll see lots of people, including professional landscapers, do. Mulch volcanoes are the worst thing you can do when it comes to applying mulch. Really detrimental. And ironically is that mulch volcano, what it does is it also holds moisture along the trunk, which, as you know, when you hold moisture along the trunk, that can trigger roots to grow.
Yep.
And when you have a mulch volcano, those roots will grow out, but then they will hit sunlight, and roots do not like UV rays, and so they'll turn away. And what that does is it creates a circular motion. And so the mulch volcanoes will result yet again in girdling roots long term. We're
big fans of wood chips and mulch in general around here, because wood chips, as Daniel said, are organic matter. They're going to break down slowly over time, but they also are little sponges. When it rains, these wood chips will help to mitigate flooding issues because they'll soak up all of that excess moisture. But then when it's dry for a long spell, like last year when we had a 90-day drought, those wood chips full of water basically act like tiny sponges that slowly release the water over time. So basically, to recap, what we've done so far is we dug a very shallow hole, we spread out the roots, we put in some really juicy compost, then we put in some of the regular soil back, we patted it down, we didn't step on it, then we covered it with a layer of cardboard, which is basically a thermal barrier that'll stop the sun from beating down and baking the roots of the tree. Then we covered the cardboard with wood mulch. But as you were saying, we're being really, really careful to stay away, right, from the base of the tree.
Right.
So let's finish this one up. What else do we need to do? A cage of some sort to support it, because it's very shallow and fragile here.
So yeah, exactly. This little guy, with bare root trees, there's no sort of structure, there's no root ball to hold that tree in place. And so it's a really good idea to either provide a little bit of staking, or we have a cage that will support the tree and protect it from either getting trampled or blown over. Alrighty, so we are going to put this cage around it. So people will do a lot to try to control the direction the tree grows.
We like control.
We like control, but honestly, it's important to remember that this cord, this cage are very temporary. We're talking about 1, maybe 2 seasons, and that is it. because in these conditions, you know, we have full sunlight, we have water, and so it's honestly, again, best to just let the tree do what it does and step out of the way.
Great, we have another tree to do. Well, see you in 6 years when you're ready to give me some peaches. Nectarines, whatever, they're the same basically. All right, Daniel, you've already pointed out that we've got my next problem right here. What's wrong with this tree?
So most homeowners are gonna be dealing with trees like this, and the biggest problem is right here, the pot.
Oh, what's wrong with the pot?
So the problem with pots is we talked again a lot about how trees want to spread their roots out, typically in kind of a radial way on the surface, you know, first foot or two of soil, and how girdling roots ultimately result in the death of the tree.
Uh-oh.
This contained pot results in root-bound girdling roots. So if we just pull this out of the pot and stick it in the ground, that tree, honestly, 9 times out of 10 is gonna be doomed down the road. And again, this is what almost everybody's planting. So most people's trees in their yard are going to die eventually because of the issues of that tree being grown in a pot.
Okay, so let's make sure that we don't screw this up any worse than I already have, shall we?
All right, so let's pull this out of the pot here. Okay, if we're looking at the roots here, they honestly don't look that bad. And that's probably because this tree is containerized rather than container grown. It's probably planted from a cutting like the tree just planted and placed in the pot rather than grown initially in the pot.
Which, by the way, is the biggest scam that fruit tree companies are doing to take our monies. Big fruit tree places will buy thousands of tiny little bare root sticks and then put them in pots, wait for them to leaf out, and then sell them to us, the idiot home buyers who hate money apparently, for a huge, huge profit. So bare root trees are like your favorite trees to plant, right?
Right.
They're way cheaper, and there's a little bit less immediate reward because you're not planting something that already has leaves on it. But just like a lot of other plants in the garden, like the less stuff that's going on up here when you plant the tree, the better.
Yeah.
And let's also talk really quickly about the time of year, because that is probably pretty pertinent as well.
Sure. And so right now we are in early spring, and that's a good time to plant trees. You want to plant the tree when conditions are relatively mild. So you can start planting from when the tree goes dormant in the fall to late spring. That's about the latest you want to go. Planting in the fall, there's honestly a lot of advantage because the tree isn't photosynthesizing, but those roots still have some time to get somewhat established before the growing season.
Plus you've got all that winter water that'll happen naturally. Am I doing anything wrong here, or is this?
No, that's great. But yeah, let's talk about what you're doing is, you know, when you pulled this out of the pot, the soil was all the way up to here. And again, we want to find that root flare where the trunk meets the roots, because that determines the depth we're going to plant that tree.
So already we're like 3 inches down from where that dirt line in the pot was. So we want to make sure we come all the way down to these roots, just like Daniel said. So like this is going to be our highest point, not here like I've done on a few of the trees that are struggling over there.
Right. And also what you're doing, I think, you know, we've probably removed enough of this mulch and stuff, but as we're finding that root flare, again, we are checking this whole root system, making sure there's no roots that are on this first tier that are gonna end up growing around the tree.
Yeah.
And so honestly, surprisingly, this tree looks pretty dang good.
Well, that has something to do with the chooser at the store, but that's only because you told me how to choose. Previously, I would have just gone willy-nilly with whatever was available.
Right.
All right, Mr. Hole Digger.
So, all right, again, we want to go for not a deep, narrow hole. We want to go for a shallow, wide hole. So the hole is gonna be no deeper than this root flare. And also we're gonna make it a little bit wider than this root ball so that we can add in some of this healthy compost and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Give this tree, again, a nice environment in its roots that has good soil structure, that has all the biological activity that's gonna help these roots be healthy.
Great. So instead of deep and wide, like the song says, we're going shallow and wide, so those deep roots can spread
And we
far
got
and
some,
wide.
we got some really nice compacted clay soil full of rocks.
That's okay. We have the compost to fix it. It's very important, my friends, that you hire your favorite arborist to help you dig the holes so you can stand here and look good while he does it. Okay, so just showing this again, this is what Daniel was talking about. Like you can see this like kind of significant line here. This is where the dirt in the pot was. And we need to scrape that all the way back down to the first root here. This is gonna be our like max depth for the tree. We don't wanna go any higher than this. Then we also wanna just like look through as we're like, you know, kind of, we don't wanna tear any of the roots off, but as we kind of remove the soil, we wanna make sure that none of these roots are growing around each other, which will suffocate the tree, because roots need to breathe. I think there's like a 90s band, something having to do with that. How are we looking, Daniel?
All right, we're looking awesome.
All right, grand.
Let's get this tree in the ground.
Let's do it.
So since this was grown in a container, you know, this is basically the shape and size of the container it was grown in. Luckily, again, we don't have any serious circular things. So look at the hole we made and how different it is from what you would expect for planting a tree. You know,
literally how I've planted every other tree that exists. Somehow my peach tree has thrived, but we're still unclear as to why that was the case.
So if you look here, the root flare,
Yep.
ground level, that's right where we want it. But if you look, this hole is about 2 to 2.5 times wider than the root ball.
Okay.
And so what we're gonna do now is backfill it with a combination of compost with a little bit of the native soil, because that will let the tree and the roots kind of adapt. If we just did like pure rich compost and then the roots are growing and hitting that hard compacted clay,
they would then want to just like stick around where it's easy.
They then just might circle and eventually result in girdling roots.
Okie dokie. So I would hope that there's a common theme being realized here. Girdling roots are bad. We don't want them. We want to make sure we're doing everything we possibly can to avoid them. So because this is such clay, hard pan soil, we're going to mix the compost in with that so that like as it kind of eases its way in, it's like, okay, we can do this. We'll break through the rest of this clay. We'll make lots more roots out and about on the town.
And again, you know, this is gonna be your future garden. And I know you are gonna be applying a lot of mulch that's gonna break up this clay and make it a better environment. So long-term, this tree is gonna have a great future.
Awesome. Well, that's what we want for all our trees here now. Now, Daniel, as I'm doing this, I'm realizing what actually might quickly become a problem if we don't address it.
We know this is
real
fruit.
Yeah, we can get rid of that. We know that it's fruit. That's the only kind. This is not buried very deep, so it's pretty fragile. So I'm gonna go get some stakes. So while you finish burying it, I'll go get some stakes.
Perfect. In our first fruit tree pruning video, I said like avoid staking if you can. And obviously for these container grown trees or containerized trees, that's not gonna be a really option. For me as like a professional, I was doing a lot with balled and burlap trees that had like a 200-pound root ball. And so you'd stick that in the ground and the tree would stay put. But obviously this thing is gonna be very susceptible to moving in the wind. So we're gonna do a triangle because that, you know, we're gonna be able to set things up so that it has the most kind of protection from any direction.
This tree is a lot taller than the other one, so it seems like a more dangerous target for the string tip trimmer. So we're going to protect it the exact same way. We're gonna put a little moisture / crabgrass barrier right here. We're gonna plant it with some friends because no tree on my farm wants to be lonely. And eventually this will look really pretty, just like the whole rest of the pond will, but currently it looks a little bit like a nuclear waste site.
All right, Ann, here's some mulch for this one.
Oh, grand. Okay, I'll let you spread it while I put the blueberry in.
All right.
Man, that is really hard down in there. I do think it has something to do with the fact that this is the pig's literal stomping ground.
Alrighty, so what I'm doing here is we're gonna stake this guy, and we're using this nice organic hemp rope. One huge issue with staking is the staking material will end up girdling the tree. As that tree grows, and if it's tight there, it will end up, you know, cutting off that system that transports the nutrients up there. So I'm using this old hose to just kind of provide a wider thing so it doesn't end up like pinching the tree and end up killing it. And again, with this, we're trying to protect it from wind, but we still want it to be able to respond to the wind. So as I place the other ones, we're just gonna pull it slightly this way, and we want it to be loose enough that it can still move, but tight enough that it will protect it from actually blowing over.
And right now, I'm remembering a tip from the last video. The number one thing that people did to kill their fruit trees was leave these dang tags on them, which would then, you guessed it, girdle the tree. So we're gonna take this and we're gonna move it over to a branch.
That's right. And you know, if this tree gets established quickly and does well, that can just take literally a year for this to grow wide enough that that ends up choking it.
That's wild stuff, man.
And if we plant our trees correctly, they get established and grow pretty fast.
That's the dream. I want to be picking plum assorted within the next 2 years, Daniel. Get after it.
Honestly, it might be this year because this had a ton of flowers on it.
It says plum and cherry. There's no way that that's plums and cherries together, is it?
I don't know what you bought, Ann.
Well, me neither, clearly. Well, it's just very confusing because it's supposed to be 2 different kinds of plums, like the little yellow ones and the purple ones, which is their correct genus and species, in case you're wondering. Science is fun. All right, Daniel, it's probably pretty important that we actually talk about watering because I think most beginner gardeners water their garden way too much and suffocate their plants. What do we need to do for these trees?
It is really important to remember that trees like infrequent deep watering, not frequent shallow watering. And
so we're not going to do a sprinkle and a tinkle. We're going to just like set the hose in the hole for like an hour.
Depends on the soil, honestly. And that's the thing, is there's not a formula. You need to be like looking and assessing your soil. If it has a significant amount of moisture, you know, you don't need to water. If it's looking a little bit dry, maybe a couple gallons a couple times a week. If it is the heat of summer and things are just parched, yeah, you might want to leave it on there for about 30 minutes, 3, maybe 4 times a week. But you want to make sure that soil is moist enough, but that it isn't saturated. Because if these roots are constantly saturated in water, again, they're just going to suffocate and die.
How are we supposed to breathe with no air? So before we get demonetized, let's talk about our Mulch volcano here and how that's actually going to contribute. We are putting this here literally because the sun beating down on black earth will cause water to evaporate right off the soil. We want to make sure that we have every little bit of soil covered with mulch, which will help with water retention, with weed suppression and everything else. But this little cardboard right here is a fantastic little place for me to take off my glove and stick my little finger in there. If that's even remotely moist, I probably don't need to water the tree. In the heat of summer, we can also look at the leaves. If they start to curl, that's a sign that our tree be real thirsty. All right, let's go look at my biggest tree planting mistake that we are now gonna fix. All right, Daniel is digging a new burial ground for an old tree that we have had to literally uproot for a few reasons. First, because in my excitement about my tiny little stick trees, I planted it way too close to my peach tree and it started leaning towards the light, AKA away from the peach tree, and I'm super OCD and a crooked tree in my garden ain't gonna cut it. But also, last summer after we tried doing an initial pruning to see how it would react to pruning, we realized that this tree was really, really unhealthy. And imagine my surprise when we started digging this up to find some extremely girdled roots. Daniel, perfect. Tell us more about what's going on here.
So when we initially pruned this and saw how it was struggling, and I actually looked at it, I did a little excavation and it was buried up to here. That is almost 6 to 8 inches too deep.
Who did that?
But yeah, it was in the ground and I could literally just move the tree and see it moving in the ground, which a tree shouldn't do, especially after it's been established for 3 years.
Especially not in Tennessee when it's tornado season.
Yeah, and so that's an indication it was buried too deep, but also that we had some pretty serious girdling roots. So if you look here, this is a really good example of a girdling root. So you can see this was a surface root that wrapped around here and it's pinching this other surface root, and it can severely, one, ruin the structural integrity of the tree because it's not able to anchor itself as well, but also that can lead this side of the tree to not be able to transport nutrients up here, and part of the tree can die.
Do you think that's what this little butthole here is about?
Maybe. Honestly, that's probably mechanical damage from planting. So another really big mistake when people are planting trees is, you know, it's easy to get careless. We see trees as these strong things, but they're really delicate.
Especially when they're little sticks like that,
especially when they're really young. So if you scratch the bark or damage the roots, that can be present in the tree for its entire life. So this guy here, it's actually kind of on its way of healing up, but that was probably mechanical damage somewhere along the process of being maybe in the nursery, maybe transported, or maybe when it was planted.
Wow, I'm really getting a real education here.
So we had some options. We could either let the tree be, just remove it and throw it away, or try to save it. And of course, we're gonna try to save it. And so what that's—
would never throw away a 4-year-old plum tree that has in fact borne fruit before.
Exactly. So what that's gonna look like is we're gonna do something that seems kind of crazy and painful, but we're actually gonna use a chisel to cut this girdling root completely off.
Do you really want a chisel or do you want a little saw?
A chisel is gonna be easier to control and cause less damage than a saw.
Okay, well, let's go for it.
All right, so we're gonna do a little bit of— it seems ironic, but you have to kill the girdling root to save the tree. And Anne is judging my carpentry skills on this.
No, I would never judge. I will make some like snarky comments probably, but you're doing great. I'm proud of you.
Oh, thank you. All right, so let's see if we can just—
wow, wow.
not quite.
Oh, look at that, look at that. Wow, wow, wow.
There is our girdling root. Oh man, but bad news, Anne.
Nope, don't hit me with that.
So I cut off this girdling root, but in doing so, it revealed that the root beneath it
is
also a girdling root.
I think like we can save it. I believe in us.
All right, so that means this root here is growing down, around, and up. So I'm gonna remove this too, which is the one you're holding.
Okay. I've decided that it's important to interject at this point that Daniel also thinks planting big trees like this is a huge waste of money because buying a tree this size is gonna be about $120 to $200. And its chances of survival, obviously, hopefully your tree that you're buying has better roots than this piece of garbage. But buying a bigger tree is always a bigger risk because the more that you have going on up top, the less opportunity you have to establish what's important down below.
So with that, I just think people feel so much pressure with planting trees. Like there's so much risk because again, these trees are expensive and time intensive. If we're able to mitigate that risk by buying cheaper, smaller trees are gonna establish easier. And also it's not gonna be so devastating if one doesn't make it. Like in nature, trees produce millions, if not billions of seeds, and most of those seeds don't turn into trees. You know, it's like, it's a numbers game. So if we're able to play that numbers game by buying cheap little bare root trees or plant from seeds, we're gonna be able to plant more trees, we'll probably have more success and it won't feel so intense.
And if you start with little bare root trees like that, like I had 50 of those little nectarine sticks in a little box like this for the last 2 years. I didn't need a ton of space and the fittest did survive. So we're now planting those as little tiny baby trees, but that was literally just prunings I'd taken off of a nectarine tree and plopped right in the ground.
So we removed those girdling roots. This side of the tree doesn't have a lot of support. So we're gonna plant this following the same process as we did the others. Also this root system, digging it out on the ground the way I did, like it does not have a lot supporting it. So this guy is gonna need some TLC.
Which is why we're planting it in the most fertile part of the garden.
Right, and that, honestly, I was gonna say that is like, I could have dug that with my hands. The soil here is amazing. And it was just like that other soil, just what, like 3 or 4 years ago?
Yep.
It's mind blowing, I can't believe it.
We have a whole video on how to fix your soil. Check it out. All right, Daniel, replant my tree, please. After breaking my heart last year, cutting off plum after plum after plum.
And honestly, since the soil is so healthy, I am not getting the hole as wide as I might normally.
Because we're not gonna have to do much about it.
Because we're not gonna have to do much about it. All right, so if you're able to hold it there.
Sure thing.
I
Wing.
will get a lot of this soil that we dug up that is beautiful and healthy and has a wonderful ecosystem going underneath it to support it.
While Daniel is working on the staking process of this tree, I'll tell you a little bit about the business that I've been working with Daniel for the last 1.5 years to start. It's called Be Your Own Arborist. And I helped Daniel get set up with a Squarespace website, just like my website. Daniel and I are friends for a reason. We are both very, very interested in permaculture and outdoor activities, and both kind of suck at using computers. So knowing how easy Squarespace is for someone like me, a total tech luddite, to use, I suggested that Daniel use that for his site as well. So if you want to learn more about planting trees, pruning trees, check out Daniel's website, beyourownarborist.com. Squarespace is a fantastic resource for people who are looking to start their very own online business. It has very easy to use drag and drop style templates that were designed by artists, so your site will look professional even if you know nothing about web design. They have made it so easy for me to capture every step of this 12-year journey from total city slicker to full-time farmer on my Squarespace website. Visitors to my online store will find merchandise, project plans, online courses. If you've learned anything from me during the last 6 years on this YouTube channel and you want to start a website of your own, check out Squarespace. When you're ready to launch, you can go to squarespace.com/AnnofAllTrades and you'll get a 10% discount. All right, Daniel, we got our plum tree replanted. Please live, please live. We got our little bare root nectarine planted and our potted plum assorted planted. We still have like 300 more trees to plant around the rim of the pond, over in the pasture, but I think we've got a pretty good handle on how to plant fruit trees at this point.
I think so. We covered a lot of ground.
That is a mulch joke. Make sure that you never leave your soil uncovered. And the next video in this series is propagation, right?
That's right.
So in our first video in this series, which got like 2-point-something million views. Thank you all for watching. Daniel's a star. In that video, we got thousands of comments from people saying, couldn't you just take those sticks that you cut off and put them in the ground and make more trees? And the answer to that question is both yes and no. You'll find out those answers if you stay tuned and watch the next video in this series. We'll see you there. Thanks for being here, Daniel. Cheers!